from Jeremy Boring titled Tucker and Candace Are Wrong About Israel, and Here's the Proof. Let's jump in.
All our money goes to f***ing Israel. This, according to Theo Von during an appearance with Joe Rogan last week. As of right now, the legacy of Trump's second term is, according to Dave Smith, doing anything Israel wants. And Tucker Carlson tells us Bibi Netanyahu is apparently in charge of the United States. Everywhere you turn on social media and on the biggest podcasts and YouTube channels, the message is the same. Israel controls the American government. Israel controls the American military. Israel controls America itself. They want you to believe that our politicians belong to Israel, that our military fights wars for Israel, that we're no longer a sovereign nation, but a vassal state of the state of Israel. The purveyors of this theory state it just so, as undisputed and undeniable fact. It's self-evident to hear them tell it.
Even when you hear Jeremy Boring say it, it just sounds so fucking ridiculous that's actually what people believe and are, kind of creating their whole channels and identity about this thing that they think is a fact, which obviously it's not.
Everyone knows it, even though, of course, not everyone does. No one is allowed to say it, even though, of course, it's all they can talk about. If it seems absurd to you that a country the size of New Jersey with a GDP roughly half that of Ohio could control the world's hegemonic superpower, that's because it is absurd. But just because an idea is stupid on its face doesn't mean it can't be powerful. As this narrative has been repeated like a steady drumbeat since October 7th, support for the state of Israel in America has declined. Hostility toward Israel has gone up. Americans have historically supported Israel over the Palestinians, but according to research from Gallup, that's no longer the case. For the first time in history last year, more Americans say they side with the Palestinians than the Israelis in the Middle East conflict. According to an NBC poll from 2013 till now, Democrat support for Israel has been almost cut in half. It sits today at 17%. And Republican support for Israel is on the decline as well, though it's still at a healthy 70%. The age divide makes it all the more shocking. In 2025, a Harvard-Harris poll found that 60% of 18 to 24-year-olds actually support Hamas over Israel. And a 2024 study found that 33% of Americans, a third of the nation, believe Israeli operatives are manipulating U.S. policy. And of course, it isn't just Israel. A 2024 study found that 24% of Americans harbor extensive anti-Semitic attitudes toward Jewish people. That's up from 20% in 2022. And much of that rise has been driven by millennials and Gen Z. Among those two younger generations, nearly a quarter say they don't believe the Holocaust actually occurred, or if it did occur, it was certainly exaggerated by history, or they're just not sure. Oh, and 15% of them believe it's acceptable to hold neo-Nazi views, too. In another poll,
that's fucking madness. Like, that's absolutely madness. Anyways. There's nothing else to really say about it except that that's madness. And hearing Jeremy Boring say it actually out loud, even though I cover this stuff a lot, is like wild.
5% of respondents aged 18 to 22 disagreed with the statement that Jews have a positive impact on the United States. If that sounds surprising, it shouldn't. While it's certainly possible to criticize the state of Israel without resorting to anti-Semitism, many of the purveyors of the Israel controls America narrative seem dead set on proving that it isn't. What starts as a critique of Israeli policy, often, though certainly not always, devolves into outright attacks on Jews. When given the chance to interview American Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, for example, Tucker Carlson found time to ask if the Jews in Israel today are really the same as the Jews in the Bible. And while Candace Owens loves to say that I once fired her for simply criticizing the secular state of Israel, they love to call it the secular state of Israel, by the way, the fact that she's still repeating the same blood libels 2 years later, blaming Jews for everything from pornography to pedophilia, from child sacrifice to the murder of Christians worldwide, kind of gives the game away. But fundamentally, the Israel controls America narrative isn't really about Israel. It's about America. America is our country. If our country is controlled by another country, well, then everything we think is true about ourselves is actually a lie. And that's what they want you to believe. They want you to believe we aren't a strong nation, but a weak one, that we aren't a free people, but slaves. That's the message. You are powerless. Your nation is weak. Your leaders are weak. You're weak. Your vote doesn't matter. Give up. Like so much of what's peddled by the grift industrial complex, the message is really just hopelessness.
Yeah, as it relates to young men, this kind of theory, this logic kind of works really well. Right? Young men are struggling. That's pretty much a fact. And the conspiracy theory that the Jews run the world has kind of overtaken at least social media. I don't know if people actually believe it in real life, but you just heard Jeremy talk about the numbers. And so since young men are struggling and they don't know who to blame or how to go to help or what sense of belonging they have, and they fall into the manosphere trap or the Tate trap or, all these other, masculine men, quote unquote, not really. Obviously, they're fake. It's a charade of what a true masculine man is. But since they're struggling so much, they don't know who to blame it on. And since the conspiracy theory that Jews run the world or Israel runs the world is the conspiracy theory that's really popular right now, now young men are blaming Jews and Israel. Now, if you get young men to get on more dates, able to buy a house, get out of the house, get in shape, have a girlfriend, I think they're quote unquote potentially anti-Semitic views, I don't really think they hate Jews, would probably go away because their lives improve. And so when lives in America are actually suffering, we want to blame it on something outside of ourselves. And that conspiracy at the time now it just happens to be Jews in Israel instead of taking full accountability for our life and responsibility. But young men do need our help. And so if they were able to buy a house, able to get a girlfriend, I think some of those feelings would go away because when we are deeply struggling, it's easiest to just blame something and not take responsibility for it, even though I think young men do need our help in a serious way, but they also need to take responsibility for their lives and figure out what direction they want to be in the man they want to be. Then they're flooded with, pseudo bullshit loser role models on the internet, and they think it's okay to just blame everyone else except themselves. Not blame themselves, but take responsibility is a better way to put it.
Hopeless people, as it turns out, give up their power more easily than people with hope because hopeless people believe their power is already gone. And they often give it up to the very people who convinced them they were hopeless to begin with. It's an old political playbook used by revolutionaries and radicals throughout history. But is it true? Are we hopeless? Are we slaves? Are we controlled by the tiny secular state of the supposedly not even real Jews somewhere on the other side of the globe? Well, it's easy to think so when our own country and culture have changed so much so fast. It's easy to think so when the future is so shrouded in mystery. It's easy to think so when our political leaders have become corrupt and third rate. Of course, it doesn't hurt that we've all become so isolated and atomized and drugged by the narcotic that is the algorithm either. And throughout history, when people feel this unsettled, we often look for a scapegoat. And that scapegoat, often enough, has been the Jews, a tiny and tight-knit group of highly identifiable people with a unique and peculiar set of values who never quite assimilate into the culture around them, but still manage oftentimes to find a lot of success in that culture. They can be easy to blame. But as a great man once said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So let's ask the question, does Israel actually control our country? Well, the oldest argument made by the Israel controls America crowd is money. Specifically, how much money Israel and American Jews spend trying to influence American politics and politicians. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC, is a lobbying group that claims to be working to strengthen U.S.-Israel relations. But if you ask the Israel haters, AIPAC is a sinister cabal of money launderers who buy off politicians so they'll support Israel. Last summer, Candace suggested that, quote, Trump commands the worship of AIPAC. Degenerate influencer Dan Bilzerian said that AIPAC makes America, quote, a puppet of Israel. And it will remain, according to Bilzerian, a puppet until AIPAC registers as a foreign agent. Now, AIPAC is an influential group, but here's the thing. They aren't foreign. AIPAC is made up of Americans spending American money to lobby the American government.
Yeah, I put a video on my YouTube channel. So if you're on my YouTube channel right now streaming this, it's about a 12-minute video. It's actually an article from Coleman Hughes where he breaks down the Israel lobby and kind of Israel derangement syndrome. And I read that article to kind of break it down in video format about the Israel lobby, how much money they actually spent, and how there's very, very, very little evidence to suggest this very bold claim that Israel controls the American government. And so maybe you want to check that out. But I think Jeremy Boring probably is about to go into some of the same information. So let's see.
And yes, many of the Americans in AIPAC are Jewish Americans who, in case anyone needs to be reminded, are still Americans. It's a large lobby group because, as it turns out, America is home to the second largest Jewish population anywhere on Earth. But it ain't foreign. They're also not the most influential. If you look at the data, in 2024, according to Open Secrets, they ranked number 18 in contributions, number 21 in outside spending, and number 191 in money spent on actual lobbying.
And so when people counteract this point, they just completely ignore it, that they're not even in the top 10. And they say, well, AIPAC doesn't have to spend money like that because they're blackmailing all the politicians because of Mossad and Israel. So there's always sort of another way out for people to blame and continue this sort of feedback loop of Jew hatred all back on itself, even though the information on opensecrets.org says, hey, they're 18th, they're 21st, all these things. There's many other lobbying organizations that spend way more money. Well, they only do that to kind of hide the fact they're not spending money and to hide the fact they're blackmailing. And so it's all kind of the ridiculous thing that sort of, again, it's a mind virus, Israel derangement syndrome, or you basically just hate Jews, one or the other.
Compare that to other organizations like the National Association of Realtors. The National Association of Realtors spent 28 times more money lobbying than AIPAC did in 2024. But you never hear about a shadowy cabal of realtors trying to take over the country, do you? And of course, that's the point. Because even if AIPAC were the biggest lobbying group, and they're not, that still wouldn't be evidence that we're being controlled by them. Yeah, the left likes to claim that politicians only do things for money, that they only support the Second Amendment because they're secretly controlled by the NRA. But if you ask anyone with common sense, they'll tell you it's a lot more likely that these politicians already support the Second Amendment, and that's why the NRA supports them. The NRA, as it turns out, backs politicians who agree with the NRA and opposes politicians who don't agree with the NRA. That's what lobbying groups do. That's what everyone does in a free republic. So too with AIPAC. But what about actual foreign lobbying? Isn't it true that Israel spends enormous sums of money attempting to influence U.S. policy? Yes. In fact, Israel spent $188 million between 2016 and 2024 alone. That's a lot of money. Except when you realize Israel is only 10th place. It sits behind countries like the UAE, the Bahamas, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Marshall Islands, South Korea, Liberia, Japan, even China. China alone spent a whopping $446 million during that same period of time. Now, if you insist that dollars spent is a function of how much control a foreign nation exerts over America, you'd have to conclude that we're controlled by the UAE or the Chinese communists. Also, Saudi Arabia, home of the 9/11 terrorists, Qatar, which sheltered the leadership of Hamas after 10/7, and for some reason, the Marshall Islands. So when you take a brief look at the actual facts, the idea that Israel is using money to run our government, it just falls apart. Of course, the grift doesn't care. Debunk one lie and the grifter moves straight on to the next. America, they insist, keeps fighting Israel's wars. In fact, every American who died in Iraq and even Afghanistan died for Israel. Some of them even imply that every American who died in World War II died for the Jews. And I say the Jews because, of course, there was no Israel during World War II. But this is nonsense. For better and for worse, the global war on terror was fought by America in response to the attacks on America by al-Qaeda on 9/11. Afghanistan is a war that would have been joined by any American president of either political party if they had been in power on that terrible September day. Any country harboring Osama bin Laden was going to face the justice of the American military after 3,000 of our countrymen were murdered in a single morning. The conduct of the war, its length, its cost, all of that is debatable. But its cause is as clear as that of any conflict in all of history. As to Iraq, it's true that Bibi Netanyahu wanted America to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And Bibi Netanyahu was a very famous and influential Israeli at the time. But what he was not was the prime minister of Israel. The actual government of Israel in 2003 cautioned against America's invasion of Iraq, preferring instead to focus on the bigger regional threat, Iran. George W. Bush had his own reasons for invading Iraq. For one, Saddam had tried to assassinate the president's own father.
That's also another evidence towards the fact that Israel doesn't control um, the United States government. But most people would say that's an exception to the rule. That's an exception to most people would say who really believe that Israel controls the U.S. government would say that fact that they didn't do what they said there is the exception to the rule, not the other way around where they don't really have evidence. They just have a feeling.
Former President George H.W. Bush. It had been misleading international weapons inspectors and firing on our planes in the no-fly zone for a decade. And President Bush clearly believed America needed a bigger military victory after 9/11 than just toppling the relatively weak Taliban in Afghanistan. He wanted a transformational victory in the Middle East, one that would cement American influence in the region, that would alter the political and cultural reality there, that would draw radicals to fight our lethal military in Iraq instead of leaving them to plan fights against our civilians at home. And he wanted to box in Iran, who was already the most dangerous player in that part of the world, and a much harder one to challenge directly before Israel degraded Hamas and Hezbollah and before the invention of the modern missile interceptor. The Iraq War may or may not have been wise. Giving up our hard-won gains there, as President Obama did in his first term, certainly wasn't. But that's not the point. The point is, the existence of those reasons negates the insistence by the Israel controls America crowd that we only fought the Iraq War for Israel. We were fighting for our own reasons against Israel's express counsel. In World War II, that merits no response, but just for good measure, Japan attacked the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor, and Germany immediately declared war on America. So there's that. Right now, the biggest proof being offered in favor of the Israel controls America narrative is the simple fact that America is fighting a war in Iran. The argument goes something like this. America has absolutely nothing to gain, nothing at all from this war in Iran. By contrast, every Israeli government since the 1980s has wanted America to go to war in Iran. Since Israel wanted the war, and since America has nothing to gain, we must be fighting this war because Israel forced us to, whether by influence or by coercion. Big if true. The problem is, it isn't true. The problem is that America absolutely has an interest in waging its current war in Iran. For one thing, Iran has built terror proxies around the Middle East.
And if you've been following Trump, like he's been very consistent about his feelings on Iran for like the last 20 or 30 years. I don't know the exact date that Trump stated that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons, but he's been pretty consistent. And the aims, I think, of Israel and the United States for this war in Iran are totally different. Israel certainly does want a regime change because Iran is an existential threat to Israel. America doesn't want that. And I don't want American troops on the ground, boots on the ground. If Israel really wants that, they're going to have to put their own boots on the ground. That just is what it is. I don't want our American servicemen over there having boots on the ground when that's not kind of our stated mission goal. Now, I don't know exactly what our stated mission goal is. It's been kind of hazy with where Trump is headed with that. But I don't think most Americans would want actual American troops on the ground, even though we feel for the Iranian people and their freedom and all that type of stuff. That means a lot. But I don't know if America can be the world's police in every single conflict of all time when people actually in America right now are deeply struggling, and that should be where our focus is. But also Jeremy's making some good points here that the kind of anti-Israel crowd will just ignore and then keep saying falsehoods and keep saying this about stuff that's not true, that's not based in fact or evidence, because that's what grifters do.
To kill and pressure our allies into acting against our interest. Iran has built alliances with our largest global competitors, Russia and China, and it's supplied them with access to the region and with the energy they need with which to challenge us. Iran has undermined the US dollar, actively seeking to destroy it as the global trade and reserve currency. Iran has, for years, threatened the Strait of Hormuz, challenging America's commitment to freedom of the seas and threatening global energy and food resources. Iran not only chants death to America, but for half a century has made good on the threat. They've killed directly or indirectly, many Americans, hundreds and hundreds of Americans during that time, and they even attempted to kill President Donald Trump himself. And of course, while doing all of that, Iran has continued to enrich uranium far beyond what's required for civilian nuclear power. And it's built a drone and ballistic missile capability to guard that nuclear program to an almost insurmountable degree. It's easy to fantasize about a world where America just doesn't have to care about these things, where we're protected by these vast oceans, where we never have to worry what happens outside of our borders again. But that's exactly what it is, a fantasy. The real world is complex, messy, dangerous. Against that complexity and messiness and danger, powerful nations compete for primacy, for themselves and for their values. American power, American wealth, and American influence have secured the global order for almost a century. Imperfectly, of course, but not without great effect. For the average American, we've all but defeated war, disease, poverty, and death as part of our daily lives. Our dominance has come with a cost. Of course it has. That's the nature of life in the real world, the fallen world, as we Christians call it. And we don't call it that just because of our theology either, but because of our basic power of observation. One can argue about the efficacy of our action in Iran. One can argue about the prudence of our action in Iran. But to suggest America has nothing to gain from its action in Iran, that it has no logical or moral reason to fight this war, or that American interests aren't implicated in the conflict, it's just absurd on its face. But now let's turn our eyes to Donald Trump, because there's one other thing you have to believe, an insane, impossible thing, if you're going to assume that the U.S. is controlled by Israel. Candace Owens just said that Donald Trump is, quote, deeply unwell and lives in a White House occupied by satanic Zionists. Just last month, she said that Trump, quote, does as instructed by Jared Kushner and Bibi Netanyahu. According to Candace, those instructions include, quote, mass murder of children because Israel worships Baal. Of course, to believe that, you have to assume Donald Trump is a weak, feckless.
I think it's Baal or Baal. I don't know. Baal, I guess. Is that Baal? What actually is that? Let's see. What is Baal? Anyways, figure that out in a second.
Subservient chump. Donald Trump is many things. Weak, feckless, and subservient, he is not. We're talking about a guy who pretty much has just one mode: win at all costs. Trump isn't the kind of guy who plays second fiddle to anyone, including Israel. What evidence do these people cite that Donald Trump is some meek slave of the state of Israel? Well, mostly it's this.
Here you go. This is how Candace Owens believes it. In later medieval grimoires, Baal is listed as a powerful king of hell who can make people invisible. That's what Candace Owens thinks that the Jews worship or something or whatever. She also thinks that the people in Israel are like Khazarian Turks or something. I mean, she just, she goes from one kind of insane theory to the next. So yeah, she definitely transitioned into like demonology because she thinks that they're satanic Zionists and like this Baal is like a king of hell or whatever. So that's kind of my understanding of it, but maybe she sees it in a different way, but it's all kind of pretty ridiculous.
That Donald Trump treats Israel as an ally and not as an enemy, as they would prefer. In fact, Donald Trump doesn't just treat Israel as an ally, but an important ally. Tucker Carlson disagrees on both counts. He said of our alliance with Israel, I don't even know what that means. Last December in Doha, Qatar, Tucker called Israel, quote, a completely insignificant nation in which the U.S. has, quote, no overriding strategic interest. What are we getting out of this, he asked. Nothing. It's only cost. As to its importance, Tucker mocked Israel to Theo Von, saying, quote, you're a tiny country that has no strategic value at all. And he said virtually the same thing to Doug Wilson. Israel, he said, has, quote, no resources, no strategic value at all. Israel, apart from our defense guarantee, is meaningless. No strategic value at all, insignificant, meaningless. 3 religions have contested for control of Jerusalem for well over 1,000 years. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Between them, they represent the majority of people on planet Earth. All of the holiest sites in Judaism are there, of course, as are all of the holiest sites in Christianity. Islam's third holiest site is in the Holy Land. So, for as long as there is a Christianity, and as long as there is a Judaism, and as long as there is an Islam, whatever nation controls the land we call Israel will be significant. They will have meaning. Two more absurd words Tucker couldn't have chosen. As to strategic importance, just about every major empire in recorded history has fought over the land.
Tucker's on a vibe now where I think he just like before he starts recording, and his producer or whoever it is like, let's just say the most outrageous shit that's not founded in truth ever and see if people buy it. And then behind the scenes, we'll kind of laugh about it. I think that's where he's at because he can't actually believe some of this stuff. He doesn't know the word ally. He knows the word ally. He's getting detained at the airport. He's not really getting detained. Like it's just spewing horse shit. And then obviously what Jeremy just said, is more evidence of that as well.
And of Israel. The Babylonians did it, the Persians did it, the Greeks and the Romans, the Byzantines and the Muslims, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, even the British. They've all, at one point or several points in history, fought for control of the Holy Land. If Israel has no strategic importance, then the term strategic importance has no meaning. Israel, it turns out, is about the most strategically important place on earth. And again, they're our allies. The U.S. spends about $3.8 billion a year on aid to Israel. And in turn, Israel spends about $3.8 billion a year buying weapons from the U.S. Israel provides us with intelligence beyond what we could purchase at any price. They work with us to innovate.
I also did a breakdown of the $3.8 billion. If you want a full breakdown of that, exactly where the money's going, what comes back, the jobs, the weapons, the infrastructure, things of that nature, you also can look at that video on my YouTube channel as well. All right, let's continue.
Drone and cybersecurity technology. They tend to vote with us too in international bodies. At the United Nations, in fact, no other country votes with America as often as Israel, who supports us over 90% of the time. America's other top allies? Well, from 2005 to 2020, Britain only voted with us about 80% of the time. Italy, about 75. France, about 70. And Qatar, whom Tucker calls one of our greatest allies, only voted with us about 32% of the time. Now, allies don't always agree with one another, but by any measure, Israel is a great friend to the United States. But let's look at one last bit of evidence. It happened just last weekend over Easter. Last Friday, an American F-15 fighter jet was shot down over Iran. Both crew members managed to eject, and one was quickly rescued. The weapons systems officer, however, was wounded. He landed deep inside enemy territory. This immediately kicked off a dramatic race between Iranian forces and the United States to see who would be able to recover the airman first. What happened next is incredible. The weapons systems officer climbed to the top of a nearby ridge to hide and put out an emergency beacon so he could be located by American forces. Iran's regime put out a reward for the airman's head. By the grace of God, we found him first. We found him just as Iran's forces were closing in. According to President Trump, the mission involved 155 aircraft, including 4 bombers, 64 fighters, 48 refueling tankers, and 13 rescue aircraft. America lost an A-10 Warthog in the fight. We lost 2 C-130 transport planes. And there are reports we may have lost helicopters and Reaper drones too. Fortunately, we didn't lose any humans. We did all of that to save one man. And we count it all gain. One reason the American military is the greatest fighting force the world has ever known is just this. Every single American service member knows the cavalry is coming. No one is left behind. No other fighting force on earth is so ruthless in the rescue of a single soul. Well, no other fighting force except for one.
Certainly not jihadists, who the whole point for them to go to war is to die, for the ticket to paradise, for martyrdom. But people don't realize that about jihadists.
Israel was right there beside us. Their own war machine pivoted to aid in the rescue of our man. They halted bombing in various areas to ensure they didn't harm our efforts. They bombed at least one target specifically to help our man survive. To me, That sounds like the behavior of a close friend, or as President Trump called them, a little brother. It does not sound like an enemy country hell bent on controlling the United States. Of course, many in the Israel controls America crowd were suggesting that Israel was actually trying to murder our downed airmen. Joe Kent, who recently joined the anti-Israel grift, even retweeted a post suggesting that America itself was trying to kill our own airmen instead of trying to rescue them.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't see those facts that people were actually saying that Israel and America's own servicemen were trying to kill him. That's gee. I mean, how far can you really go at this point? Like, I guess you got to keep pushing the edges. This Joe Kent situation is also very unique and interesting. But anyway, so let's continue.
Which highlights the most important point. The grift industrial complex purports to hate Israel, but it's actually America they despise. If you listen long enough, you'll encounter not only constant wild conspiracy theories blaming Israel and the Jews for every war and every national tragedy, every national calamity, every bad policy decision, every ounce of decay that you see in America and the West more broadly, which admittedly is quite an accomplishment for 0.2% of the world's population. But you'll hear something else. You'll hear a recurring theme of loathing for our country as it's actually founded. You may encounter some lip service to loving America, at least from a few of them, but the specific examples of what exactly they love about America are pretty thin. Mostly, they see America itself as a force for evil in the world. Getting rid of our alliance with Israel is only one small step.
Quote Dave Smith, the America's the greatest terror organization in the world or something. That's what he said on Piers Morgan and doubled down on it too.
In the greater project of exchanging the country we have for the country they wish we had. For years, the far left's playbook has been to amass political power by convincing you that you're already powerless. Now the reactionary right is working to convince you of the exact same thing. You are powerless. Not even your president is in charge. You're a defeated nation. There's nothing you can do. You may as well just accept it. But of course, when we look up from our screens, when we take the time to think for a minute about what these people are actually saying, we see it for what it is. A desperate lie from desperate people who are desperate to have control over us. So don't give it to them. And when we look past the noise and see the truth, we see President Trump in his signature and sometimes baffling style, fighting to keep America on top. We see the awesome power of our military, the greatest fighting force the world has ever known, risking life and limb to save just one man. And we see Israeli soldiers putting their own lives at risk for their ally, the American people. Because no matter what the grifters and the malcontents and the professionally offended say, America is still second to none. Alliances shift. Great Britain, America's key ally in the 20th century, was once our greatest foe. We fought 2 wars against them on our own soil. They even burned down the White House. Israel may not always be our friend, but they are our friend today. Israel doesn't control our country. We do. Each one of us. No matter what the black pillars and doom scrollers want you to believe.